And so what we'll do is I'm going to start off by just kind of talking a little bit about MTC geography, and then hand it over to Connor so that he can introduce the USC program and get a little discussion going and see what kind of questions you have, if any. So here at MTC, we've shifted over the last year towards these pathways that I'm sure our students are familiar with. And so a lot of folks are still doing the associate in arts or the associate in science degree, and kind of getting a diverse traditional kind of 2-year liberal arts background, and then moving on to whatever majors they like at other schools. And the other option is to pick a specific pathway to really focus on a specific discipline or career path in those 2 years, and where you pick up your gen ed, but you also focus on some specific specialized courses that would set you up better for the majors at your other institutions. And the geography pathway is designed to set you up if you want to go into geography, if you want to do any part of that field, if you want to be a physical geographer and study environmental systems, or whether you want to be a human geographer and do international relations or economic geography or any other subfield there, or if you want to be a cartographer. And so the idea is that geography kind of sets you up as a pathway, as a pivot point to kind of go into whichever field you like from there. As the description says on the MTC website, it's also a way to get an international component in your education for your first 2 years with us. And even if you don't want to do geography, you could go into international business, or you could go into international relations and political science, or you could go into environmental studies. There are lots of different ways in which you can use the concepts of diversity and globalization and space in order to pursue your interests. And so on that note, and kind of hand it over to Connor and start to talk about USC programs and kind of what happens there at the 4-year level. And I'm here if you have questions or want to add something to the chat, I can forward it to the panelists. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gerbatten, for having us today. Excited to kind of talk to you all about our program at USC. And I thought what we could do is talk about a couple of things. I'm not going to get too far into sort of the nitty-gritty details of our program, although I'm happy to talk about that. I thought what would be a really nice way to start out is for I will talk, and then Derek and hopefully Dean can talk a little bit about why they became interested in geography as a field. One of the things that I think that's important to think about is as you kind of are transitioning to a 4-year institution, and for any sort of institution, is what is it actually that you're interested in, and having an interested in some of these topics is important. So for me, I had taken some undergraduate geography classes. I had never taken sort of like a formal geography class in high school or middle school. I'd done a lot of labeling maps and doing the sort of things that we tend to associate with geography. But once I sort of finished my undergraduate degree, which was in political science, I did nothing with political science. I wasn't really interested in it. But what I kept on coming back to is that I was really interested in cities. I was really interested in why cities are the way that they are, why the streets go where they do, why the buildings are where they are, and why it was that places were different. One place was different than another. One neighborhood seemed to have developed in quite a different way from other places. And so what I was looking for and trying to understand was why it was that cities kind of became this particular way, right? And that drew me ultimately into the field of geography, which gives us a really great, I think, understanding of helps us to understand why places are different, sort of this, what we can think of as areal differentiation, why some areas are different than others. And it's been sort of an amazing toolkit for me to use to try to make sense of the world in that way. So that's what really drew me in. And maybe Derek or Dean, would you guys want to talk about how you became interested?
Derek, you go first, and then I'll go after you.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I started off at Midlands Tech. Had took a geography class with Dr. Graviton, as he referenced, and the whole kind of picking a concentration that wasn't really there when I started in 2016. It was either just your associates in science or your associates in arts. There wasn't really that concentration. So I actually went for biology, and my undergrad degree is a bachelor's in biology. And the thing that I kind of realized, I took a lot of geography classes and I really enjoyed them. And I enjoyed the ways of thinking and a lot of the concepts that I learned. And the thing about biology programs is that a lot of them are very pre-med oriented, or so people going to be medical doctors or nurses or something like that. And which is great. Obviously, you know, we need that and everything. But I really became interested in landscapes and in conservation biology, and conserving, you know, biodiversity and things like that. And I wasn't really seeing that in a lot of the biology grad programs I was looking at. But, you know, I knew I enjoyed geography. I had taken a lot of classes starting at Midlands Tech and then at my undergrad institution. And I kind of was looking at it. And the thing about conservation biology is that, you know, it's great to have that knowledge. Like, you know, if you want to conserve something, you got to know, like, if you want to conserve some woodpecker or some kind of bird, you got to know what they're into, right? You got to know what they want and what is good as far as habitat and stuff like that for them. But there's so much more to it, because conservation also has a lot of politics behind it, like where these things are, where these habitats are. They have a lot of resource management issues. There's a lot of economic drawbacks and kind of pros and cons to weigh. And I really found that going through geography was actually the best pathway for me to continue to go into conservation and to hopefully, you know, get and do what I want to do in the world. So geography gave me that, and that's kind of how I ended up here.
Awesome, thanks, Derek. Yeah, so that's actually really interesting to hear, Derek. And I once we're all back in person, maybe we can actually like have a coffee or something. My pathway was similar in a sense, in that, like, so Connor heard this just last week. I think I was talking to his graduate class, but my undergrad is in biology and ecology and marine sciences. So I was like kind of looking at all these different life science fields and was really excited by them and the idea of environmental conservation and biological conservation. And so did a master's in ecology, and through that process was exposed to, through taking a class in cultural anthropology, like realized that conservation was a social science problem, not a natural science problem, right? And as Derek was just saying, like, there's definitely a need for understanding like habitats and ecosystems and the way that carbon moves through like a salt marsh, for example, in order to preserve it and make natural resource management decisions. But there's also the human implications of, you know, the impacts and disturbances, but also the cultures that depend on those ecosystems, right? And so conservation is a really complicated, complex, it's kind of a wicked problem, right, is one way to talk about it. It's not simple to write policy and management of such resources. So I became more aware of the social science aspect of the environment, and kind of jumped ship from ecology into anthropology and realized I'd gone a little too far. And so I came back and kind of found myself nestled in geography. And so this is my like academic route to geography. But what I liked so much about geography, right? So I'm a human environment geographer. So I study human environment interaction. So I kind of bridge the fields that Brian was talking about in the intro here. And so I was interested in this conservation aspect, but just by way of the way life kind of unfolds, got interested in coastal systems and wanted to understand and find a field, I should say, that would allow me to think about the environment and physical geography or ecology and all of those kind of biophysical sciences I had learned, but at the same time think about how humans iterate with those systems, right? We're not separate from them, and we don't just impact them, we're influenced by them as much as we influence those systems. And so there's this kind of two-way street, right? There's this co-creation. But if you think about people who live in coastal environments, they're dependent upon the coastal environment, but they affect the coastal environment, right? So there's like this kind of coastal cultural identity that gets created. And you could say that of anywhere. You could say that of Appalachia, the West Coast. I mean, any place in the world, right, has that. So geography really is this, it's the best discipline. That's what I've been saying for years. It's definitely the best discipline. It's okay if you want to do something else, but geography is the best discipline. It's very broad in its scope and it's welcoming as a discipline. And so you can study this wide range of things that's, you just can't do if you're in anthropology or ecology or biology. So I think that geography, if you want to think about space and place, which is everything, in really careful and critical ways, geography empowers you to do that through GIS, through physical geography and thinking about landform changes, and through also thinking about cultural and human dynamics as they interact with those landforms, right? So there's just a whole suite of tools that you can learn in geography, but also carefully thought out ideas about the way humans and environments interact. So that's why I became a geographer, because it was just this really interdisciplinary, fun, exciting discipline. I can talk about that. Maybe that's a question to all of us from Maurice in the chat.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Maurice, you're anticipating what's coming next, so that's good. So Brian, I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay. Oh, it says that it's been disabled for me.
Hold on a sec. I've got your slides, so let me just
Yeah,
instead of digging through the settings.
yeah, that sounds great.
Wait, hold on. I think I got it now.
Let me try again.
Yeah, try again.
It's letting me. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, so let me get things in the right spot so that okay. Yeah, so I mean, thanks, Derek and Dean. I think I had a professor who told me one time, if you want to be a geographer, the how you should know if you want to be a geographer is when you're sitting in the classroom, if you're spending all your time looking out the window and wondering what's going on out there. And I thought that was sort of summed it up really well for me. And it can be wondering about a whole lot of different things, right? Everything from sort of people to the environments that are going out there and why people are interacting the way they do. So I think it's really sort of powerful. Maurice, I'm going to get right to your question and the next slide. But one of the things I think is important is to think about what it is that you're actually going to be able to learn in this degree. So the things that we like to kind of talk about and the things that we encourage students to do in our classes is to learn how to basically get data, right? Gather the data, but then also try to make sense of it, right? How do you gather it? How do you assess it? How do you analyze it? How do you then interpret it, display it, visualize it, communicate it to other people? So we're really focused on that. And as you'll see, this is one of the areas that's really important sort of in the business world today, in the government world today, if you're working in nonprofits. Data is really a key part of a lot of these careers, how you can generate it, analyze it, and then communicate that data to other people effectively. We do create maps, right? Not all of us, but many of us do create maps. But we also generate the data, right, to make that map, right? So it's not just saying where something is, but trying to understand why the thing that's happening in that place is important. Or the slides are not all the way. I'll see if I can figure that out. You know, what other things we do, right? It's communicating effectively through with writing, with speaking. We learn to think and plan spatially, right? And so this is kind of this question of, you know, urban planning and so on, how it is that we're trying to understand cities. And then we are interested in sort of understanding the composition of the earth and the processes that operate on it. So these are a lot of the things that we've been talking about: environmental processes, economic processes, social processes, and how all those things interact. So let's talk about careers. If you look at the data, geography is an important part of, you know, we see growth in a lot of the areas that our students go into. So especially around kind of geospatial technologies, around mapping, around a lot of these things. These are areas that are growing faster than normal, and faster than other careers by 10 or 15% in a lot of cases. So if we look at some of the careers that people have gone into from our program just in the last few years, we have people who are involved in environmental consulting. You know, for example, if there's going to be a development that happens in a particular place, they try to understand the environmental impacts that will happen through that particular development. We have people who are working in real estate and with retail markets, trying to figure out where to locate industry and business. People who work for mapping companies, right, who do mapping for a living. People that are working in sort of the logistics world of trying to make sure that your packages get to your house on time. And you can imagine that that's becoming incredibly important over the last few years. Or if you saw the big ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal and stopped all the commerce, maybe you saw that as well. We have a lot of people that go and work for government in a variety of different ways. And that ranges from environmental protection and conservation to areas like healthcare, to you know, city and urban planning. In fact, I just had an email yesterday from the city of Columbia looking for trying to hire students to do some mapping work, some GIS work. But we also have people that have gone into international development, that work in human rights, that work for international NGOs and all kinds of economic development agencies. So you can see we place people in a lot of careers. And one of the things that we've done to try to facilitate that even more is to really try to develop an internship program, a really robust internship program. So right now, these are places that we have some of our majors working. So this semester, we have people who are working with all these different agencies and NGOs and businesses. So we've done a really good job. So I saw a question as a GIS department. So a GIS department is Geographic Information Systems, Geographic Information Science. And so these are places that are, you know, for a city or a water district, or, you know, that these are people that are doing the mapping for these companies to understand where, for example, roads should be, or where utility lines exist, or what's the sort of optimal placement of some of this stuff, or how, you know, we calculate our property taxes. All of these kind of things are dependent upon mapping. And as Dean put in the chat, right, these are typically located in cities, counties, states, so on. So you can see here with our internship program, you know, this is a great opportunity for students to get a lot of experience while, and this counts for course credit. And then ultimately, a lot of people end up being hired in these fields, or sometimes even at these same agencies once they graduate. So we've had a great, I think, sort of success in the last few years of trying to build that. And so it's becoming, I think, a really exciting thing. Dean or Derek, do you guys want to add anything to what I've said already? If not, I can just talk really briefly about our kind of degree options.
No, I think just the only thing I would say is what you just said about GIS departments. I mean, that's certainly one of the more clear connections to work in terms of like thinking about a skill that you can learn here and then take out. I mean, there's far beyond that. But what I meant by cities, counties, and states is the governments. but also private consulting firms also would hire people who do GIS kind of analysis. So anything spatial or map cartographic based. But I think I'm just restating mostly what Connor was saying in a different way.
Yeah, our electric utilities, for example, do a lot of GIS work. You know. So
Yeah, it's really fun stuff. I mean, the precision at which you can like map a location. I was once doing a high precision assessment of tide water, and like it said there should be an inch of tide water there, and there was exactly an inch of tide water right where I was standing, which was really exciting. Just as an anecdotal example.
And for our students here at MTC, I mean, we don't have any GIS specialized courses, but you know, a lot of the folks here are either taking my physical geography course where you're using that mastering geography software. You're essentially building maps with already established layers. And so you're using GIS in a user-friendly way. You're not sort of collecting the data yourself and you know, creating it from scratch, but you're getting a taste of sort of what it's like to compare something like topography with flood events, and then if you're in the world geography class, you know, you're getting a sense of the power of looking at sort of political boundaries versus religious diversity or language diversity and those sorts of things. So our students are getting a taste of GIS here, and I have had a student that was already working for the USGS, US Geological Survey. He does water quality monitoring with them, who came back to MTC to get a 2-year degree in order to increase his salary. And then another student that was working with the city of Casey, looking at you know, the location of sewers and topography and flood control and these kinds of things. And he was already doing this really specialized GIS work that by coming back here and sort of getting some of the conceptual tools, he was able to build some better models and that sort of thing. So our students are getting a taste of these things and the possibilities for them, I think.
That's great. Okay, so I'll maybe go to there's some good questions in the chat, and maybe we could all make some suggestions here in a second. Yeah, so the COMET, I can answer that quickly. The COMET is the Columbia, I don't know, it stands for something, but it's the bus system for the city. In fact, my younger brother does a lot of transportation planning, so he works with bus systems a lot and uses a lot of sort of GIS and mapping things. So in terms of our degree options, I won't go too far into it. I will say a couple of things. We have both you can get a BA and a BS in geography, a Bachelor of Science. We have different concentrations, so you can specialize more on GIS, for example, or you could specialize more in physical geography, or you could specialize more in human geography, or you don't have to specialize at all. You can just sort of do that. So we have it's a very flexible degree, I think. It's also a degree that you can complete very quickly. You know, you get 24 credit hours. That works out to about 7 or 8 classes to finish up with a degree in geography. So I think it's for students who may be transferring in, if cost is a concern, which it is for a lot of people, it certainly was for me. You know, it's a degree that you can complete very quickly. You can see we also offer a minor, which is, you know, two classes short of the major essentially. So sometimes we have a lot of students who double major, and that's, you know, so we have people that maybe have a major in business, but they also major in geography. Those two work together really well. Sometimes we have students that double major with sort of environmental science or environmental studies. So we have a lot of students that do that. The minor is also great. And then we also have a program for geospatial intelligence, which is, it's linked up with the Air Force, I believe, and you get a certificate when you graduate. And a lot of it is about doing sort of intelligence work, like sort of military related things. And so we have some details on that on our website if that's something that's of interest. that is most of what I had prepared. Um, Here's my contact info, our website. We're also on Instagram. We are doing a fairly good job of posting regular content on there. So I'm always happy to talk to anyone who may be interested, who may be transferring in, who may have just an interest in sort of geography generally. Um, that's what I had sort of prepared. I can stop sharing my screen. And there's some questions. So I saw this one about podcasts or book recommendations. Derek or Dean, do you guys have any?
It's a good question. I don't have any specifically that I can think of. I'm just trying to remember the name of one on hazards. To geographers, and especially here at USC, we kind of specialize in hazards. So thinking about, hazards and disasters such as wildfire, hurricanes, drought, etc. I'll see if I can find that podcast. But as for books, I guess I'm hesitant to recommend a textbook, even though Paul Robbins writes so well. The textbook we use for one of our courses is really a pleasure to read, actually. So I could share it with you if you want.
I'm a big podcast fan, and so I put two in the chat there. And the first one is called 99% Invisible, and essentially it's really about design, but the way that they approach it is to focus on a specific city and sort of talk about its historical geography and its contemporary issues. For example, there's a great episode about Chinatown in San Francisco and sort of how it came to be, and looking at Chinese diaspora and looking at natural disasters and economic change, and how that place sort of transforms over time. And then there's also really simple things that they do, getting you to notice, for example, what they call hostile design, which is ways in which public space is designed to prevent you from doing certain things. And there's a great episode about how skateboarders see urban space, and when they look at sort of modernist design, they see clean lines, and they focus on this park in Philadelphia that got sort of taken over by the skateboard community because no one was using it, and just how different people see the world, right? What they see when they look out in the urban landscape, what they see when they look out in the natural landscape. And there's another podcast that I've been listening to lately that's from Vox, and they cover one international issue a week, and they try to cover something that's really important to US foreign policy. And so they're really coming from more of a political science background, but it's always an international issue. And it always has something to do with what's going on in US politics or US life. I think that's a good one if you want to kind of get your feet wet on territorial issues, international economics, that sort of thing. So those are things I'd recommend if you want to take a look.
One of my favorite books is called Concrete and Clay, and it's about the infrastructure that sort of underlies, literally is underneath New York City. So a big part of it is about how New York City's water system developed. And it's sort of not only just kind of the engineering of how do you get water from way up in the Catskills all the way down into the city, but how does New York City as a city, right, start to take over land that's way far away from its own city limits? It would be like if Columbia was getting their water from Asheville, North Carolina, and they actually owned the land in Asheville and then kept all the development out so that they could keep the water clean, right? And they didn't have to do the filtration and all of these kind of things. So Concrete and Clay is one of my favorites. Oh, good movies or documentaries? One of one of my movies that most of my research is on energy, and one of the So there's two that come to mind. One is a good documentary that is just out, made by one of the Property Brothers. Drew and Jonathan on HGTV. I think it's called Power Trip, um, and it's a really good analysis of sort of renewable energy in the U.S. I was very surprised actually how good it was. The other one, and this one is a bit darker, is There Will Be Blood, which is Daniel Day-Lewis, and it's all about oil in the Old West. And I actually use a part of it when I'm teaching about property rights and who owns the oil that's underground. There's a really disturbing scene at the end of it, but it does a good job of helping you understand how with mineral rights underground, I could go underneath, I could drill a hole down from underneath my house. And if you live next door and had oil underneath it, I could suck the oil out from underneath your house and it would be my oil. And Daniel Day-Lewis sort of discusses it in a really disturbing way, but it's very memorable.
There's a great film that I just saw a couple days ago. It's up for lots of awards this year. It's called Nomadland, and the premise, I believe it's based on a book. I don't know anything about the book, but essentially it's about mobility and sort of the 2008 financial crisis and people who are, American citizens sort of working in industries that collapse, and the choices that they make about becoming more migrant, and the kinds of jobs they take, and the places that they can utilize in order to live in sort of a more public way, and the communities they form. And it's not academic in any sense. I mean, it's really all about sort of emotion and community, but it's a really great way to think about geography in sort of a real world context, and contemporary issues and that sort of thing. So Nomadland, I'd recommend that one. We might also think a little bit about within our work, when we do detailed studies, I mean, what are the practical applications of sort of what we do? Moments where you find yourselves presenting to a group or sort of sharing your research in kind of a non-academic way. I mean, that kind of links up with some of the jobs that we talked about, right? It's not just about sort of the data, it's about the uses of the data. And so I wonder if anybody can sort of speak to that, how your work gets shared or disseminated kind of beyond the journal.
Dean, you and Derek, why don't one of you guys go ahead?
Sure. So one of the ways that I try to do that is through, there are different ways to describe it. You could call it action research, but I do community engaged research. So I am constantly working with people in the places where I do research to generate change. And it's slow, and I'll admit it's been slower than I want it to be. But one of the things that I've started doing is writing newspaper articles for the local newspaper. So I work in coastal Georgia in McIntosh County, and work with folks on Sapelo Island. And so Darien is the county seat, and the Darien News is the newspaper there. And so I've written a few articles, and the most recent, and the one that hopefully will come out this summer, has been with someone from the place where I do most of my research, really looking at land issues. And so I think a lot about like property politics and land retention, and we're trying to make people more aware of that. For example, there's all this legalese around what Brian is actually an expert in this, around the heirs property, right? And so one of the things that we want in heirs property is, I don't want to go into too much of a lecture mode. I can do that really easily, but it's basically, have you talked to people about this, Brian? Do they know what this means, or should I explain it briefly?
It hasn't come up in these courses. I usually cover it in our 101, which is a landscape course, but I'm not covering that. But essentially it's family-owned property, but family-owned property that has been passed down through the generations without the kind of formal legal documentation that you would expect. And so the ownership is kind of muddied by history. And it's very common in South Carolina and African American communities because during Jim Crow, people wanted to avoid courts, people wanted to avoid county offices, and so passing it down informally and keeping it in the family. But now it's legally vulnerable, which is sort of, you know, the other side of that coin. I think that's enough of a context.
Yeah. So heirs property, one of the ways people are dispossessed, families are dispossessed of their land is through quitclaims, and right. And so the next piece that we're hoping to write for the newspaper is just kind of an educational process or piece of what is a quitclaim and how does that result in like me or my family losing our land. Because that's just one of the issues that's right now ongoing. There's a family who's working with a lawyer in the community on Sapelo Island where I do my work, who's basically gone to the courthouse, and you don't have to show any legal ties to the land. You just file a quitclaim in the courthouse and your name gets put on not on the deed officially, but on the court records as being someone who has stake in that property. And so that's one legal maneuver you can do to at least get your name in the records, and then through a whole extended drawn out process, maybe then through the court battles come to own the property or part of the property. And so it can be anyone. Like any of us could go to the courthouse in McIntosh County and do this. And so just trying to walk folks through that in an engaging way, right? In a newspaper article. And then the piece we wrote more recently, there was state legislation passed, or the Georgia State Legislature, a few legislators later had put forward the idea of parceling out some state-owned land, you know, historic sites under a certain category to private owners, basically selling it off in small increments. And effectively, the way the legislation was written, where I do work, it's 97% state-owned and is a wildlife management area. And there's a whole history to that. But if that wildlife management area were then able to be sold to private developers slowly, even if in small increments, that could end up radically changing the culture of the island and the community that's still there in that other 3%, right? That's private owned parcels whom are saltwater Geechee and like African American descendants of formerly enslaved peoples of the island. And so, you know, by raising an awareness of that in the local newspaper, it created a lot of pushback quickly, right? It was the newspaper editor wasn't even ready to get that story out there. And so we just spent a weekend writing something up about what that might mean for Sapelo and McIntosh County. So it's not always directly what I do, but every time I publish a research paper, I try to then publish a policy brief or some kind of white paper that's, you know, 1 or 2 pages that's not using jargon, that makes it accessible to the folks I work with and beyond, like state legislators and other people who get to make decisions in government. So that's one way to think about the outreach of my research.
So Derek, I know that you're proposing to work with Harbison State Forest. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about that. I know you're still in the early stages, but what are some of your thoughts there?
Well, Harbison, I'm attracted to it as a study area because it's a weird place. It's very, if you really stop and think about it, it's really a strange setup, and the history and the management of it kind of shows that. I mean, it's 2,000 acres of forest. It's completely within city limits. They're trying to maintain longleaf pine populations, like a habitat that's disappeared from the Southeast that used to be everywhere. Used to be a long time ago. But then they're also self-funded. The Forestry Commission in South Carolina is self-funded. They have to pay for their own stuff by selling timber. So they do logging, but they're also doing, you know, prescribed burns to maintain the forest. So there's a lot of things. And then you got, I mean, the bikers out there are just, I mean, they've taken over the place, right? It's just, you can't walk 5 feet without having to, you know, dive off the trail for a second. So it's a really strange place. And that really kind of became the reason for my study, which I'm kind of just looking at successional histories in the forest there and how different patches have had different histories of disturbance, mainly logging and fire, as I mentioned, and kind of just seeing what that means for management, because I think it's been in the news lately that timber prices are going up. That's a big, piece of the economy here in the Southeast. It always has been. But we're also battling against a century of fire suppression and trying to actually bring fire back because it's a natural part of the landscape. It always has been until European colonization. So I would hope that my research can just give a better kind of image and snapshot of what those practices are doing and how that can either be replicated other places if it's doing well, or maybe how it can be changed for the better, which would have implications for, of course, the longleaf pine habitat, and then it would have implications for the communities as well. That's kind of where I'm at.
A lot of my research is on energy, as I mentioned, and especially electricity. So it's been an exciting, interesting time in South Carolina, as it always is for the last few years around that. We had a big nuclear power plant that was going to be expanded and was then abandoned once it was about 40% complete. And all of us who pay for electricity in the state had been paying, about 15 or 20% of your bill for the last, probably 5 to 10 years was devoted towards this plant that was never completed. So a lot of my research is on sort of topics like that. So it's always sort of an interesting time to be trying to figure out what's going on and why in our electricity systems. And now, I mean, it's really sort of an exciting time to see what the kind of what renewable energy is going to, how are we going to transition to it in this state? And then on the flip side, what are the implications for if we're adding more renewables? That means that we're shutting down coal plants and natural gas plants, and that's going to have implications on the communities where those are located now. So these are a lot of the kind of things that I've been interested in. So it's occasionally someone from the news will contact me and I'll talk their ear off, and then they'll put like a 5-second clip of me on in the newspaper or something like that. But it's nice to be able to study things and to teach about things that I think are really relevant right now. And I think probably Derek and Dean would say the same thing.
Well, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. If you have any additional questions, please, pop them in the chat. Of course, part of this is to introduce you to the degree paths that are available. But I think hopefully you've recognized the diversity of the discipline. And so regardless of what your major is and where you end up going to school, I mean, it's worth looking at the geography department just to see what kinds of courses they offer and where that overlap might be with your major. If you're doing economics and you've got a economic geography or international trade class or something like that in geography, or really any field, and you want to pick up, as we've talked about, sort of the skill of GIS, kind of the technical aspect of our field, that can be really helpful. We've all been looking at and studying COVID maps, over the last year. I mean, we understand the importance of understanding the spatial dimensions of disease transmission as well as control. I'm sure we've all been looking at maps of Amazon wildfires, outback wildfires, climate change issues. You don't necessarily have to be a geographer to sort of engage with our concepts and with our tools. And so hopefully we've made that point along the way here. Anything else for the chat? And I like that we had the question about films and books, because getting some of those kind of popular, accessible books and podcasts in there, I think is good for folks to kind of take forward with them. Yeah. Connor, would you mind putting your contact info up there one more time, just in case folks want to copy that down? Or maybe it's still up there. There you go. We're seeing your calendar right now. I can do it. I can do it. Hold on. Let me see. There we go.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. It's fine.
See my daughter's ukulele lesson today at 4:30.
That sounds good.
Can't forget that. I will put my email address in the chat.
Okay. And I'll do the same with mine as well.
I'd like to just really say a big thanks to all of you, Connor and Dean and Derek, for taking this time to be with us and be part of our Social Behavioral Sciences Week and really highlight the impact of geography and how it just connects to so many very important and vital things that we're dealing with today in the public space. So thank you for that insight. This has been really terrific. I also just kind of want to highlight, I know we talked about the undergrad program at USC. And so just to step back and just as a reminder, we have a fantastic geography pathway here at Midlands Tech. And as you can see, it really leads to a lot of different opportunities. So encourage anyone who's attending in today to think about how that might help fit your own personal plans. It's designed to give you that exposure to geography and all the fundamentals you need for transfer into a 4-year program, and to really explore some that geography has to offer. Dr. Graviton does an incredible job in all those courses. And I know that if you're interested in that, I'd really encourage you to look at that and maybe talk with your advisor about how that might fit with you. I guess I would just like to know from the panelists, we've talked about our 2-year program and the 4-year program. In terms of geography and, graduate school and careers, how, what opportunities if a person chooses to go on to graduate school, how does that affect kind of their place in the marketplace and the kinds of careers it might open up? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, because Derek is here, we'll say that it's a great choice to go to graduate school at USC. But I think it is. I think our graduate students and our undergraduates here are also going on to graduate programs both at USC but also at other places. So we're happy about that. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunities, particularly in sort of the government, and then a lot of the sort of nonprofit sector, both for our master's and our PhD students. We have a lot of students, for example, that go on to work in sort of emergency management. We have a really strong sort of hazards tradition in our department. And we have other students that have gone on to work with, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. We have a lot who are working sort of in the state and in the state government in a variety of ways. So yeah, we think that there's a lot of sort of value that comes from it. And, we're always sort of trying to be in communication with our graduates to find out what are the sort of classes that we should be teaching right now. We have, for example, we've added a class on piloting drones recently. And that was in response to sort of industry demand for that kind of thing. So, we have that, for example, in the GIS world, there's a demand for a whole lot of programming now, GIS programming. So we've started more regularly offering programming classes. So we try to be receptive to sort of employee demand and shift our offerings in ways that make sense for that.
I guess just as a follow-up, are there specific specific degrees or certifications that if a person was interested in, you know, getting a job in some geography related field that is highly valued or sought after?
Yeah, I think probably the number one sort of direct path to you know, most of our graduates end up with jobs I think that they're happy with. The ones who are already getting hired before they graduate, which we're having a number of sort of around this time, are using GIS. So those who really pursue kind of a rigorous GIS degree where they're taking not just sort of the introductory classes, but getting into some of the programming and more advanced techniques classes. Those are the students who I think employees are really trying to snap up right now. You know, even like I said, before they're graduating, we have a number who are already hired, already sort of starting to work part-time in anticipation of going full-time, you know, next, I guess, in May. So.
Thanks so much.
Well, thanks again to everybody who attended, and thanks again to our panelists, and I appreciate you being here, Lloyd and Leah, in support from MTC. Thanks, y'all. Let me know if you need anything. You got our contact information in the chat. So we hope to hear from you in the future. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.